The security camera caught it all. Harold Morrison, 73. Sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile as the HOA patrol truck approached his electrified gate. 3 months of harassment, 3 months of trespassing, 3 months of threatening his granddaughter, but today was different. Today, the retired electrician had rigged a surprise that would light up more than just the night sky. As the truck's bumper kissed the metal gate, Harold raised his mug in a silent toast. "Welcome to my property, gentlemen," he whispered, just as 10,000 volts of justice crackled through the darkness. Harold Morrison's weathered hands trembled as he clutched the certified letter, the official HOA seal mocking him from crisp white letterhead. The words blurred together through his reading glasses, but the threat was crystal clear. Final notice of violation. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in legal action and potential foreclosure proceedings. Grandpa. Emma's voice cut through his fury. His 19-year-old granddaughter stood in the doorway of their modest ranch home. Her nursing scrubs wrinkled from a double shift at the hospital. "What's wrong?" Harold crumpled the letter, his knuckles white with rage. "Those vultures want to take our home, sweetheart? Say, my fence is 6 inches too high, my mailbox is the wrong shade of blue, and your car's been parked in the driveway too long." Emma's face flushed. "My car? I work 60 hours a week to pay for school. Where else am I supposed to park it?" According to the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, anywhere but here, Harold's voice carried the bitter weight of 3 decades fighting bureaucrats and bullies. They've decided we don't fit their picture-perfect neighborhood anymore. The sound of a diesel engine rumbling up their street made them both freeze. Through the window, Harold watched the familiar white pickup truck with HOA patrol emblazoned. On the side creeped past their house for the 3rd time that week. Behind the wheel sat Derek Fontaine, the association's self-appointed enforcement officer, his beady eyes scanning their property like a hawk searching for prey. "He's back," Emma whispered instinctively, stepping away from the window. Harold's jaw clenched. Derek had been harassing Emma for months, following her to work, showing up at the grocery store, making comments about her owing the community for her violations. Last week, he'd cornered her in the hospital parking lot, suggesting they could work something out regarding the mounting fines. The truck slowed to a crawl, then stopped directly in front of their driveway. Derek climbed out, clipboard in hand, his HOA badge glinting in the afternoon sun like a sheriff's star in some twisted western. He was younger than Harold's son, would have been probably 35, soft, around the middle, with a kind of smug expression that came from wielding petty authority over decent people. "Mr. Morrison," Derek called out, his voice carrying that fake cheerfulness that made Harold's skin crawl. "I need to inspect your backyard again. We've received complaints about unauthorized structures." Harold stepped onto his front porch, Emma close behind him. "You were here yesterday, Derek, and the day before that. My property line is clearly marked, and you have no right to enter without my permission." Derek consulted his clipboard with theatrical importance. Actually, according to HOA bylaws, section 12.3, enforcement officers have the right to inspect any property for compliance violations. Your continued resistance is only making this worse for yourself and your granddaughter. The way Derek's eyes lingered on Emma made Harold's blood boil. "Get off my property now, or what, old man?" Derek stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You'll call the cops. I've got friends at the station. They know I'm just doing my job, keeping our community safe from undesirable elements." Harold felt Emma's hand grip his arm, but his focus was laser-sharp on Derek's smirking face. In his 40 years as a master electrician, Harold had dealt with his share of bullies foremen who thought they could push around the quiet guy, contractors who tried to stiff him on payment, union bosses who confused authority with intimidation. But this was different. This was personal. "You know what your problem is, Morrison?" Derek continued, emboldened by Harold's silence. "You think the rules don't apply to you? But this neighborhood has standards. Your rusty fence, your weeded lawn, that eyesore of a car taking up driveway space, it's bringing down everyone's property values. My husband bought this house in 1967. Harold said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Built that fence with his own hands. Raised our son here, watched him graduate, watched him leave for the army. That eyesore belongs to my granddaughter, who works 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. This is our home. Derek's laugh was sharp and cruel. Was your home? Check your mortgage documents, Grandpa. When you signed those HOA agreements, you gave up the right to live like a slob. And unless you want to find yourself and your pretty granddaughter out on the street, you'll start showing proper respect. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. We've done nothing wrong. Every violation you've cited is either fabricated or so minor it's ridiculous. You're harassing us. Derek's smile widened. Harassment, I prefer to call it. Persistent community engagement. And speaking of engagement, Emma, my offer still stands. 1 dinner, 1 conversation about your future in this neighborhood, and maybe some of these violations disappear. Harold saw red. In one fluid motion, he stepped between Derek and his granddaughter, his carpenter's hands forming fists that had swung hammers for 4 decades. You son of a grandpa, don't. Emma's voice cut through his fury. He's not worth it. He's trying to provoke you. Derek chuckled, backing toward his truck. Smart girl. Wouldn't want Grandpa here getting arrested for assault. Hard to fight. An eviction from a jail cell. He climbed into his pickup, rolling down the window. You've got until Friday to bring everything into compliance. After that, the lawyers take over. And Emma, my dinner invitation expires then too. Might want to reconsider while you still have options. The truck pulled away, leaving a cloud of diesel exhaust and the echo of Derek's laughter. Harold stood on his porch, watching until the vehicle disappeared around the corner, his mind already working through possibilities and plans. We should call the police, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew Derek's connections ran deep in their small town. Harold put his arm around his granddaughter's shoulders, feeling the weight of her fear and frustration. No, sweetheart, the police won't help us. But don't worry, old Grandpa has a few tricks left. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Harold descended into his basement workshop. The familiar smell of copper wire and electrical components calmed his racing mind as he surveyed his tools. 40 years of electrical work had taught him many things about power, how to harness it, how to control it, and how to make it work for justice when the law failed. He pulled out his voltage tester, wire strippers, and a selection of components that would make any electrician proud. The gate at the end of his driveway was metal, grounded and perfect for what he had in mind. Derek wanted to trespass. Harold would give him an experience he'd never forget as he worked through the night, connecting circuits and calculating voltages. Harold Morrison smiled for the first time in months. Tomorrow, the HOA patrol would learn that some old dogs still had bite. The trap was set. All that remained was for Derek to spring it. Dawn broke gray and cold over Maple Grove, but Harold Morrison had been awake for hours, fine-tuning his masterpiece. The gate at the end of his driveway looked innocuous, enough weathered steel painted forest green. Standing exactly 40 inches high, as per the original HOA specifications from 1985. What Derek Fontaine didn't know was that Harold had spent the pre-dawn hours transforming it into the world's most educational doorbell. Morning, Grandpa. Emma shuffled into the kitchen, her hair pulled back for another hospital shift. She paused at the window, studying the gate with suspicious eyes. Did you do something to the fence? Harold sipped his coffee, the picture of innocence. Just a little maintenance, sweetheart. Tightened a few connections. Emma's nursing training had sharpened her ability to detect when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. What kind of connections? The kind that'll teach our friend Derek about respecting private property. Harold's eyes twinkled with mischief that reminded Emma of the grandfather who used to rig elaborate Halloween pranks for the neighborhood. Kids, Grandpa, you didn't what? Install a perfectly legal electric fence system on my own property, the kind ranchers use to keep cattle from wandering. Harold's grin widened. Course not. That would require permits. Emma stared at him, torn between admiration and terror. How much voltage are we talking about? Enough to get his attention, not enough to stop his heart, unfortunately. Harold winked. Don't worry, sweetheart. I've calculated everything down to the amp. He'll get a shock he'll never forget, but he'll live to tell embarrassing stories about it. The rumble of a diesel engine interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they watched Derek's white pickup truck cruise slowly down Maple Street, right on schedule. Harold had been tracking the man's patrol patterns for weeks, Derek's ego demanded. He make his rounds at precisely the same times each day, marking his territory like a suburban wolf. "He's early today," Emma observed, unconsciously stepping away from the window. Harold checked his watch, eager to continue his harassment campaign. "I suppose." He moved to the living room, where he'd positioned a folding chair with a perfect view of the driveway. "Might want to call in sick today, sweetheart. This is going to be quite a show." Emma shook her head. "I can't miss another shift. Besides, someone should be here who knows CPR, just in case your educational voltage is more educational than intended." Derek's truck pulled to a stop across the street, and Harold felt his pulse quicken with anticipation. Through binoculars, he watched Derek consulting his clipboard with the self-importance of a general planning a military campaign. The man climbed out of his truck, straightened his HOA enforcement jacket, and began his familiar walk-around inspection of Harold's property. "Look at him," Harold muttered, strutting around like he owns the place. Derek started with the mailbox, measuring its distance from the curb with a tape measure. He made notes, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. Next came the fence height inspection, where he used a carpenter's level to check for any deviation from HOA standards. Every measurement was performed with the slow deliberation of someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. "He's building up to something," Emma said, watching from behind the curtain. "This isn't his usual quick drive-by harassment," Harold's instincts agreed. Derek was taking his time, documenting everything with photographs and detailed notes. This wasn't routine intimidation. This was evidence gathering for a legal assault. Derek completed his exterior inspection and pulled out his cell phone. Even from across the street, Harold could hear the aggressive tone of the conversation, though the words were indistinct. When Derek hung up, his expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to predatory hunger. "That's it," Derek called out, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Mr. Morrison, I need to inspect your backyard immediately. We have reports of unpermitted structures and potential code violations." Harold opened his front door but remained on the porch. "You have no right to enter my property without my permission, Derek. I've told you this every day for 3 months. And I've told you that HOA enforcement supersedes your personal preferences." Derek strode toward the driveway, his clipboard held like a weapon. "Your granddaughter's parking situation alone constitutes a violation of community standards. That heap of rust has been in your driveway for over 72 consecutive hours. Emma works double shifts to pay for nursing school. Where exactly do you suggest she park? That's not my problem." Derek had reached the sidewalk now, his eyes fixed on the gate that separated Harold's driveway from the street. "My job is maintaining property values for responsible homeowners who follow the rules." Harold felt the familiar surge of protective rage. "And my job is protecting my family from bullies who hide behind badges and clipboards." Derek's laugh was sharp and nasty. "Bullies? Old man, you haven't seen anything yet. After today's inspection, I'm recommending immediate legal action. Foreclosure proceedings, if necessary. This neighborhood deserves better than freeloaders who think they're above community standards." He reached for the gate latch, and Harold held his breath. "Don't touch that gate, Derek." Derek paused, his hand inches from the metal latch. "Or what you'll call your lawyer, your grandson." "Oh wait, your grandson's dead, isn't he? Car accident, if I remember correctly. Shame, might have taught you some respect for rules and safety." The mention of Michael Emma's father, Harold's beloved son, hit like a physical blow. Harold's vision narrowed to a tunnel, focused on Derek's sneering face. "That's enough," Emma's voice cut through Harold's rage. She stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "My father died serving his country in Afghanistan, not in a car accident. If you're going to threaten us and trespass on our property, at least get your facts straight." Derek's grin widened. "Afghanistan. Well, that explains the attitude problem. Generational disrespect for authority." He turned back to the gate, his fingers closing around the metal latch. "Let's see what other violations your grandfather has been hiding." Harold gripped the arms of his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. Emma moved beside him on the porch, her medical training warring with her desire to see Derek get exactly what he deserved. "Last warning, Derek," Harold called out. "That gate is private property. Touch it, and you're trespassing." "Sue me," Derek replied, and yanked on the latch. The electrical discharge lit up the morning like a miniature lightning strike. Derek's body went rigid as 10,000 volts of carefully calculated justice coursed through the metal gate and into his grasping hands. His clipboard flew into the air, papers scattering like startled birds. His hat launched clean off his head, and his shoes scraped against the pavement as every muscle in his body contracted simultaneously. The shock lasted exactly 1.3 seconds. Harold had timed it precisely, but Derek's high-pitched shriek seemed to echo for much longer. When the current cut off, Derek stumbled backward, his hair standing at odd angles, his enforcement jacket smoking slightly at the edges. "What the hell?" Derek screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. He stared at his hands, which were trembling uncontrollably. "You electrified your gate." Harold stood slowly, his coffee mug still steady in his weathered hands. "No, Derek. I installed a perfectly legal electric fence system to protect my property. From trespassers, there's a difference." Derek's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. "That's assault. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you own." "With what evidence?" Harold gestured to the scattered papers and Derek's disheveled appearance. "You just admitted to attempting to unlawfully enter my property." In front of witnesses, he nodded towards several neighbors who had emerged from their houses, drawn by Derek's theatrical screaming. Emma stepped forward, her nursing instincts overriding her satisfaction at seeing Derek get his comeuppance. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Derek backed toward his truck, still shaking from the electrical shock and the humiliation of being outsmarted by a 73-year-old retiree. "This isn't over, Morrison. You think you're clever, but I know people. I have connections. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Harold sipped his coffee and smiled. "Derek, son, I've been making mistakes for 7 decades. This isn't one of them." As Derek fumbled with his truck keys, his hands still trembling from the shock, Harold called out one final observation. "Oh, and Derek, next time you want to inspect my property, try knocking on the front door like a civilized human being. The gate stays electrified." Derek's truck roared to life with more engine noise than necessary, and he peeled away from the curb, leaving rubber marks on the asphalt and his scattered papers blowing in the wind. Harold Morrison sat back down in his chair, watching the last of Derek's citations flutter away like autumn leaves. For the first time in months, his property felt truly peaceful. Properly, instead of grabbing it like a caveman, Harold's voice carried grim satisfaction. "But something tells me they're not here to deliver good news." The doorbell rang again, accompanied by authoritative knocking, both of whom he recognized from his occasional visits to the local diner. "Morning, officers," Harold said evenly. "What can I do for you?" The lawyer stepped forward, a thin man with predatory eyes and a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Mr. Morrison, I'm attorney Richard Blackwood, representing the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. These officers are here to witness the service of several legal documents." Harold accepted the thick manila envelope with steady hands, though his heart was racing. "And you are your worst nightmare. If you continue this campaign of intimidation and assault against HOA enforcement personnel..." Deputy Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Morrison, we received a complaint about an alleged assault involving an electrified fence. We need to ask you some questions." "Happy to answer them, Deputy. Would you like some coffee?" To be a long conversation, Harold gestured toward his living room, noting how the lawyer's eyes immediately began cataloging every detail of the house's interior. Emma joined them, her presence adding a layer of respectability that Harold appreciated. In her nursing uniform, she looked like exactly what she was, a hard-working young woman trying to build a better life. Deputy Chen pulled out his notebook. "Mr. Fontaine claims you deliberately electrified your gate to cause him harm when he attempted to perform his duties as an HOA enforcement officer." "Derek claims a lot of things," Harold replied calmly. "Most of them are lies designed to justify his harassment of my granddaughter and his repeated trespassing on my property." Attorney Blackwood's smile was sharp as a razor blade. "Trespassing." Harold leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. 18 years after I moved in, I never signed any covenant." The lawyer's confidence flickered for just a moment. "Property transfers are subject to existing covenants and restrictions. My property was never transferred. I inherited it from my late wife, who inherited it from her parents. No sale, no transfer, no covenant. Harold's smile was gentle but deadly. Deputy Martinez looked between Harold and the increasingly flustered attorney. So you're saying the HOA has no authority over your property? That's exactly what I'm saying. Which makes Derek's repeated attempts to enter my backyard without permission a clear case of criminal trespassing. Harold turned to address the lawyer directly. Your client has been harassing my granddaughter for months, following her to work, making inappropriate suggestions about working out her supposed violations. That's stalking, Counselor. Emma spoke up, her voice steady despite the tremor Harold could hear underneath. He cornered me in the hospital parking lot last week, suggested I could make the violations go away if I had dinner with him. I refused, he said. I'd regret not being more cooperative with community standards. Attorney Blackwood's face was turning an interesting shade of red. Harold laughed, a sound without humor. I installed a legal electric fence system on my own property to deter trespassers. The voltage? If Derek got shocked, it's because he was attempting to unlawfully enter my property. Deputy Chen made notes, clearly uncomfortable with the shifting dynamics of the situation. Mr. Morrison, do you have permits for this electric fence? Harold pulled a folder from his coffee table, producing official documents with the satisfied air of a man who'd done his homework. Filed with the county 3 weeks ago. Inspection passed, system approved. Everything completely legal and up to code. The lawyer snatched the permits, scanning them with increasing frustration. This doesn't change the fact that you deliberately injured my client. Your client deliberately trespassed on my property after being warned multiple times that he had no legal authority to do so. Harold's voice hardened. And frankly, Counselor, a man who stalks young women and threatens elderly homeowners probably deserved a lot worse than a mild electrical shock. Deputy Martinez closed his notebook. Mr. Morrison, based on what we're hearing, it sounds like you might want to file a complaint against Mr. Fontaine for harassment and trespassing. Already planning to, Harold replied. Emma's been documenting every incident, every inappropriate comment, every unlawful entry onto our property. We have dates, times, and witnesses. Attorney Blackwood stood abruptly, his composure cracking. The HOA has significant resources and political connections. Your little electrical prank won't save you from the consequences of defying community standards. Community standards. Emma's voice cut through the lawyer's bluster like a scalpel. What community standard allows a grown man to sexually harass a college student? What standard permits stalking? What standard authorizes trespassing? Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Morrison. The Maple Grove HOA doesn't lose legal battles. After the officials left, Harold and Emma sat in their living room, processing the implications of the morning's confrontation. The legal documents scattered across the coffee table painted a picture of an organization with deep pockets and a willingness to use them. They're not going to give up, Emma said quietly. Harold studied the foreclosure notice, the restraining order request, and the civil suit filing. No, they're not, but they made one crucial mistake, sweetheart. What's that? Harold's smile was sharp as winter wind. They underestimated how far an old electrician will go to protect his family. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he'd memorized weeks ago. Hello, Channel 7 News. I'd like to report a story about HOA corruption and the sexual harassment of a young nursing rent. Flows both Channel 7's investigative reporter Jessica Chen arrived at Harold's house with a cameraman and the kind of predatory enthusiasm that made corrupt officials break out in cold sweats. Connection that guaranteed his story would get the attention it deserved. Mr. Morrison, Jessica said, settling into the living room chair where Harold had watched Derek's electrical education just days before. Tell me about the Maple Grove HOA's campaign against your family. For the next 2 hours, Harold laid out the entire sordid tale. Emma provided dates, times, and recordings she'd made of Derek's inappropriate advances. Harold produced the permits, proving his electric fence was completely legal, contrasted with documented evidence of Derek's repeated trespassing. The coup de grace came when Harold showed Jessica the property title research, proving he'd never been subject to HOA authority in the first place. So you're telling me, Jessica said, her eyes lighting up with the glow of a reporter smelling Pulitzer potential, that this HOA has been harassing you for months over violations of rules that don't even apply to your property. Enforcement officers sexually harassed my granddaughter and threatened to have us evicted if she didn't go out with him, Harold confirmed. All documented, all witnessed, all reported to authorities who chose to look the other way until Derek got a taste of his own medicine. Jessica turned to Emma. "And you have recordings of these inappropriate advances?" Emma nodded, pulling out her phone. 3 months' worth, including the conversation where he said, "My parking violations could disappear if I was more cooperative." With community standards, the cameraman's expression darkened as he listened to Derek's sleazy propositions. Even professionals who'd covered every type of human depravity seemed genuinely disgusted by the HOA enforcer's tactics. "We'll need to interview the other side," Jessica said, though her tone suggested she already knew which way this story would play. "Do you have contact information from Mr. Fontaine and the HOA board?" "Everything you need. Board meeting minutes, financial records I obtained through public information requests, and Derek's employment history. Turns out he was fired from his last job for ... similar behavior." 2 days later, the story hit the evening news like a lightning bolt. Jessica's report was a masterclass in investigative journalism, complete with hidden camera footage of Derek making crude comments about Emma to another HOA employee. Financial records showing board members awarding themselves questionable contracts, an expert testimony about the legality of Harold's electric fence system. The piece concluded with Derek cornered outside his apartment, screaming at the camera crew about fake news and biased reporting, while his hands still showed visible burns from his encounter with Harold's gate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Harold's phone rang constantly with calls from neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. Apparently, Derek had been targeting several families in the community, always with the same pattern-manufactured violations, followed by suggestions that attractive female family members could work something out with enforcement. Emma fielded calls from 3 different law firms offering to represent them pro bono, each one promising to bury the HOA in litigation costs. 2 women's rights organizations reached out about Derek's pattern of sexual harassment, and the state attorney general's office opened an investigation into the HOA's financial practices. But the most satisfying call came from Margaret Hendricks, the HOA board president whose own daughter had been targeted by Derek the previous summer. "Mr. Morrison," Margaret's voice was tight with barely controlled fury, "I owe you an apology and an explanation." Harold had met Margaret exactly once at a community barbecue 5 years earlier. She'd seemed like a reasonable woman, then a retired teacher who'd gotten involved in local governance with good intentions. "I'm listening, Margaret. Derek told us you were a problem resident, said you were behind on dues, violating multiple covenants, being belligerent with enforcement staff. He showed us photos of violations, documentation of your granddaughter's supposed infractions. It all seemed legitimate." Harold's grip tightened on the phone. "And you never thought to verify his claims, never bothered to research whether I was actually subject to HOA authority." Margaret's sigh carried the weight of genuine regret. "Richard Blackwood assured us the legal standing was solid. And Derek, ... Derek was very convincing. He said you'd threatened him, that your granddaughter was hostile and uncooperative, while he was sexually harassing her and illegally trespassing on my property. I know that now." After your news story aired, 6 other families came forward with similar experiences. Derek's been running his own private extortion racket, using HOA authority as cover. Margaret's voice hardened with administrative determination. "The board held an emergency meeting last night. We're also severing our relationship with Richard Blackwood's law firm." Harold felt a surge of satisfaction, but he wasn't done. What about the families he's already damaged? The people he's harassed, threatened, extorted? A victim compensation fund. Anyone who can document damages caused by Derek's actions will be eligible for restitution. The HOA will also be implementing new oversight procedures and transparency requirements. And the legal actions against my family dropped. All of them, with a formal apology and compensation for your legal expenses. Margaret paused. "Mr. Morrison, I know this doesn't undo the harm that's been done, but I want you to know that Derek fooled a lot of good people. We thought we were protecting property values and community standards. We had no idea we'd hired a predator." Appreciated Margaret's remorse, but 40 years of dealing with bureaucrats had taught him that good intentions paved more than just roads to hell. "Margaret, The problem wasn't just Derek. The problem was a system that gave one man unchecked authority over other people's lives. That's going to change, or Emma and I will continue telling our story to anyone who will listen. We're implementing mandatory training, oversight committees, and an appeals process for violations. No single enforcement officer will ever have Derek's level of unsupervised authority again. After Margaret hung up, Harold found Emma in the kitchen, studying for her upcoming nursing board exams. She looked up from her textbooks with exhausted relief. "So it's over?" she asked. Harold considered the question carefully. Derek was fired, the legal threats were gone, and the HOA was implementing reforms. The immediate crisis had passed, but something deeper had been accomplished. "The harassment's over," he said finally. "We showed a whole community that bullies can be stopped when people stand up and fight back." Emma's smile was tired but genuine. "Think Derek learned his lesson." Harold chuckled, remembering the look of shock and humiliation on Derek's face. As 10,000 volts of justice coursed through his grasping hands, "Oh, I think Derek got an education he'll never forget. And if he didn't," Harold gestured toward the gate, where new warning signs now clearly marked the electric fence system. "Well, the classroom's always open for remedial lessons." That evening, as Harold sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, he reflected on the strange turns life could take. 3 months ago, he'd been a grieving widower, trying to protect his granddaughter from petty bureaucrats. Now he was a minor folk hero whose story had sparked community-wide reforms and multiple criminal investigations. Quietly at the end of his driveway, no longer a weapon but a symbol proof that sometimes the current really did flow both ways, and that justice could be as simple as giving bullies exactly what they deserved. 3 weeks after Derek's termination. Street, the same truck, the same predatory pace, but something was different. The HOA logos had been painted over with primer, and the truck looked like it hadn't been washed since Derek's electrical encounter. When it stopped in front of Harold's house, Harold reached for the wrench in his toolbox, his mind already calculating the distance to his front door. Derek climbed out of the truck, and Harold barely recognized the man. Gone was the smug confidence and pressed uniform. Derek's clothes were rumpled, his face was unshaven. "Don't reach for anything, Morrison," Derek called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Harold kept his hand on the wrench. Derek stopped at the sidewalk, careful not to approach the gate that had delivered his most memorable education. "I need to talk to you, and to Emma. 5 minutes, that's all. You've got some nerve showing up here after what you put us through. Please." The word came out, strangled, desperate. The news story went viral. "I can't get work anywhere. People recognize me on the street and call me names." Harold felt no sympathy whatsoever. Actions have consequences. "Derek, you spent months terrorizing my granddaughter and half the neighborhood. I expected to do my job. I was trying to maintain community standards, protect property values. Yeah, maybe I came on too strong sometimes, but I wasn't some kind of monster. You sexually harassed college students and threatened elderly homeowners. What do you call that?" "I call it—" Derek's voice trailed off as he seemed to realize how his words sounded. "But you ruined my life over a few inappropriate comments and some overzealous enforcement." Harold's anger flared white-hot, suggested she prostitute herself to make parking violations disappear. "That's not overzealous enforcement. That's criminal behavior." The front door opened and Emma stepped onto the porch. She'd been listening from inside, and her face was pale but determined. "What do you want, Derek?" Derek's demeanor shifted when he saw Emma. "I was just trying to help you understand the importance of community standards." Emma's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Help me understand. You told me I could make my violations disappear if I was more cooperative. You followed me to the hospital and suggested we discuss my options over dinner. I was offering legitimate solutions to legitimate problems. You were offering to exchange sexual favors for official favors." Emma cut him off. "That's called quid pro quo sexual harassment, and it's a felony." Derek's face twisted with a mixture of desperation and rage. "You people don't understand what I was trying to do for this community. Property values, neighborhood standards, keeping out the undesirable elements." Undesirable elements. Harold stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "You mean families like mine? Working people who don't fit your narrow definition of respectability. I mean people who think the rules don't apply to them. Derek's mask slipped completely, revealing the bigotry and entitlement that had driven his harassment campaign. Your granddaughter parks wherever she wants, works odd hours, brings down the tone of the neighborhood with her old car and her night shift. Schedule. You refuse to maintain your property to community standards, ignore legitimate violations, and then assault enforcement officers with illegal weapons. Harold's wrench felt heavy in his hand, but Emma's voice stopped him from taking another step forward. "There it is," she said quietly, "the real Derek Fontaine, but the same entitled predator who's been making our lives hell for months." Derek realized his mistake too late. "Behind us, work something out." Harold's voice was deadly calm. "Like you wanted Emma to work something out with her parking violations. That's not what I meant. Get off my property, Derek. Now, I was a respected member of this community, a homeowner, a professional. Now, I'm facing harassment charges, sexual, misconduct allegations, and I can't even get a job bagging groceries because everyone's seen that damn news story." "Good," Emma said simply. "Maybe the next young woman you encounter will be safe, because employers know what you really are. You think you're so special, so pure, but you're just another." He never finished the sentence. Harold's wrench caught him square in the solar plexus, dropping him to his knees on the sidewalk. The older man stood over Derek's gasping form, his face carved from granite. "You just threatened my granddaughter on my property after months of sexual harassment," Harold said conversationally. "You can single quotes assault me, what witnesses?" Harold looked around the empty street. Then, up at the security camera he'd installed above his garage, "All I see is a trespasser who became verbally abusive and threatening, requiring defensive action to protect my family." Emma pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with practiced efficiency. "On our property after making violent threats." Derek's eyes widened with panic as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "There's no restraining order." "There is, as of this morning," Emma informed him calmly. "You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of any of us. This isn't over, Morrison. I'll find a way to make you pay for what you've done to me." "Derek, son, you just violated a restraining order, made criminal threats, and trespassed on private property. All recorded on camera, all witnessed by a licensed nurse, all documented for the district attorney." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If I were you, I'd worry less about making me pay and more about whether your next home has bars on the windows." As the police cars pulled up and officers began placing Derek in handcuffs, Harold felt a profound sense of closure. The predator had revealed his true nature one final time, and now he would face the full consequences of his actions. Emma slipped her arm through Harold's as they watched Derek being loaded into the back of a patrol car. "I think that's really the end of it." Harold watched the patrol car disappear around the corner, taking Derek toward what would likely be a lengthy prison sentence. "I think Derek Fontaine just taught himself the most important lesson of his life, that some people fight back, and when they do, bullies don't get second chances." The electric gate hummed softly in the afternoon breeze, its work finally complete.